So we're going to think now about the kingdom in relation to the mortal nations in the kingdom. I just want to sort of shape it around the change that's going to have to take place. And just to give it that shape, just think about the words of Hebrews chapter 7 in relation to the change which will take place in the kingdom. So just come across to Hebrews 7 for a moment, please, verse 1 and 2. It's one of those amazing verses here where the New Testament comments on the words from the Old Testament and brings out the precision of the meaning that's there. In Hebrews 7 it's talking about Melchizedek, and it says, "For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to whom also Abraham gave a tenth part of all, first being by interpretation king of righteousness, and after that king of Salem, which is king of peace." So it makes the point that Melchizedek was the name of that king priest that Abraham met, and that he was the king of Salem. But it pointed out that it's in a particular order, isn't it? That he's first, by interpretation, king of righteousness, and after that also king of Salem, which is king of peace. And so when we think about what's going to happen to the mortals in the kingdom, and particularly to the nations, there's got to be a huge change in that kingdom age, from a world of wickedness that we have today to, first of all, being a kingdom of righteousness, and then it can be a kingdom of peace. And the same point is made back in the Old Testament. Can we come back to Isaiah chapter 32? Isaiah 32 verse 16 says, "Then judgment shall dwell in the wilderness, and righteousness remain in the fruitful field." And verse 17 says, "And the work of righteousness shall be peace, and the effect of righteousness, quietness and assurance forever." So before there is peace, before there is quietness and assurance, there needs to be righteousness. There needs to be that great change. As we read elsewhere, there is no peace, says God, to the wicked. And so the wicked, which are like a troubled sea casting up mire and dirt, need to be changed to come under the rulership of Christ and the saints, as Sam was talking about, the nations being taught by the saints and understanding the truth of the gospel. And so there is a process to go through. And so we're just going to think through some of those verses whereby we get from the position of the nations in darkness to the enlightenment of the nations, and then to the beautiful picture then of the nations of the kingdom enjoying the blessings of that kingdom of righteousness and of peace. So thinking about that then, we've seen the two elements, righteousness and peace. And first of all, the nations need to be enlightened. We think of the conclusion of that picture of Armageddon, which Brother Chris referred to. And in Ezekiel 38, perhaps don't need to turn to this verse, but the last verse of Ezekiel 38 gives us that conclusion. What happens after the invasion of Gog and the defeat of that Russian military power in the land of Israel? The conclusion is God has destroyed the army. And verse 23, thus will I magnify myself and sanctify myself, and I will be known in the eyes of many nations, and they shall know that I am Yahweh. And so the whole point of what's happening is to bring the peoples of the world to a knowledge of God. They shall know that I am the Lord, that I am Yahweh. And so the nations are going to see the power of God. God will have intervened in the affairs of the world. And that's spoken of in Revelation. Revelation chapter 14 and verse 6 and 7. Revelation 14 opens with that vision of the kingdom with the Lamb upon Mount Zion. And verse 6 and 7 talk about the preaching of the gospel. The nations of the world will have the opportunity to listen, to accept the gospel message. And verse 6 says, I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven and earth and the sea and the fountains of waters. So here's the gospel message which is preached to every nation, kindred, tongue and people. They have that opportunity to respond to the God who is the great creator. The world's in darkness at the moment, thinking that man has evolved from nothing, as it were, over millions of years. But here the gospel is preached. Worship him that made heaven and earth and sea and the fountains of waters. They all recognise that there is a great God, there is a creator who is to be worshipped. And so they'll realise that the things they've been thinking of and believing in before are just vanity and lies. Come back to the Old Testament prophets. Jeremiah chapter 16 speaks of this time when the peoples of the world will realise that there is a true God and that their previous beliefs were just darkness. Jeremiah 16 verse 19 says, O Lord, my strength and my fortress and my refuge in the day of affliction, the Gentiles shall come unto thee from the ends of the earth, and shall say, surely our fathers have inherited lies, vanity, and things wherein is no profit. Shall a man make gods unto himself, and they are no gods? Therefore, behold, I will this once cause them to know, and I will cause them to know mine hand and my might, and they shall know that my name is Yahweh. So here the nations are to recognise the vanity and lies from which they have been brought to the light of that gospel truth. There's a similar reference just coming across to Isaiah 25 and verse 7. Just makes a similar point in different words. Isaiah 25 and verse 7 says, he will destroy in this mountain the face of the covering cast over all people, and the veil that is spread over the nations. And he will swallow up death in victory. And so the veil cast over all people is the darkness in which the world lives at the present time, not knowing the truth of the gospel, that gospel which will be pronounced. And so as a result of that time of preaching and enlightenment, the world will be changed. And so we have that wonderful phrase that we think about it so regularly, that the earth will be filled with the glory of Yahweh as the waters cover the sea. And in Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 14, where that point is made, another verse where that point is made, it says, "The earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of Yahweh, as the waters cover the sea." The nations will be enlightened. They will know of the glory of God. And so those references will come to pass. So some of those things we looked at with Mordecai a few moments ago, that the nations will go up holding the skirt of him that is a Jew. They will go up to Jerusalem to worship, because they will accept that the God of Israel is the great creator and the one whom they should go up to worship. And so the nations which accept the rulership of Christ will be transformed. Those people will come under a rule of righteousness. And following on from the warfare which will be required to establish the kingdom, there will be a kingdom of peace. And so let's just think about that. Let's come across to Psalm 72 finally. When righteousness is established, there will be a kingdom in which there is long life, in which there is food for all, and in which there is peace and justice and righteousness. So we see that in verse 6, "He shall come down like rain upon the mown grass and showers that water the earth. In his days shall the righteous flourish, and the abundance of peace, as long as the moon endureth." Here's that kingdom time when the king is sitting upon the throne, judging in righteousness, and there will be an abundance of peace in that day. And again in verse 14, "He shall redeem their soul from deceit and violence, and precious shall their blood be in his sight." Because Jesus will be that king who, as verse 13 said, shall spare the poor and needy, shall save the souls of the needy. And there will be no fear of violence, there will be no fear of deceit, because Jesus will be that righteous king, the righteous judge. And as we said, verse 16 speaks about the plenty in that kingdom age. "There shall be an handful of corn in the earth upon the top of the mountains." There will be food for all everywhere throughout the world. "The fruit thereof shall shake like Lebanon, and they of the city shall flourish like the grass of the earth. His name shall endure forever, and his name shall be continued as long as the sun. Men shall call him, shall be blessed in him. All nations shall call him blessed." And so for the saints who help to bring about that kingdom, to rule the kingdom in righteousness, for the Jews who will be there in the land, that land promised to Abraham, and for the Gentiles who go up to Jerusalem year by year to worship God, the scriptures give us a wonderful picture of a kingdom of righteousness and of peace, for which we all long and pray.